Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guests include Meijken Westenskow and Shannon Conway. Meijken is a professor of practice, and Shannon is an assistant professor, both at UNT Dallas College of Law. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to have you to talk about a new first edition book, Skills for NextGen, Client Scenarios in Torts, that is through Aspen. And so let's start by first congratulating you on the publication of this book. But secondly, what prompted the two of you to get together to think about writing a book?
So Meijken and I worked together when we were both working in the bar readiness and academic success department together. And then I moved over and started to doctrinal and started teaching torts. And we kept talking about, I often consulted with Meijken trying to figure out navigate my way through a first year torts class. And I kept talking about, I just wish that I could talk more about real world, because that's when I really feel like the students relate. And I happen to also teach insurance law, which was my practice area as a practitioner. And I would often bring in stories or actual cases into my insurance law class. And I was telling Meijken, I just want to write a book, like a textbook for use in class that uses more real world examples. And then she happened to be talking with Aspen on something else. And the idea came about in her conversation, and we kind of just ran with it.
Yeah, I had worked with 1Ls and students in the bar space. And in working with 1Ls, it felt like everything was so abstract for them. It was so hard to take these principles and for them to understand why they were relevant and what they meant. And so I was eager to have more client-centered exercises for them. And then, of course, as we were learning more and more about NextGen, that became also important in preparing them for the bar exam, that they be ready to do more advocacy and representation for clients. So that was part of the impetus for the book as well.
So NextGen is coming to us, right, to Texas in July 28, but there are some states who will have it as soon as this summer. So for listeners who may not be as familiar with NextGen, how is this bar exam going to be different than the UBE?
Yeah, some things are definitely changing, specifically in the format. Doctrinal coverage is largely remaining the same, although some subjects are going away and other subjects are being shrunk a little bit. Property, for example, is losing the rule against perpetuities as something that has to be memorized.
That is a good thing right there.
That is a good thing. The primary changes are really in the format and in the way that information is presented to examinees. So there will still be traditional MBE style questions. There is a component of that in each session, but there is more material like the current performance test, where students are given, examinees, I should say, are given client documents and asked a series of questions based on that, and are either given a multiple choice or a short answer or a small written assignment as their response.
And more than one question, right, to specific fact pattern, which is different. You could have a series of embedded questions. So in knowing what we know, it's minimal now about NextGen, but we have some sense. How did that guide your creation of the book, Skills for NextGen, Client Scenarios in Torts?
Sure. What we really tried to do is model the integrated sets, the integrated question sets that examinees are going to be seeing, where they might see a few client documents, be asked some questions, as you said, before more information is presented, and then additional questions presented to them. So that's how we modeled each exercise, tried to take the major topics in torts and create a chapter, I guess we could say, on each one. And the exercise would build as students are given more and more information, maybe starting with just the basic fact pattern, being asked to try and identify potential claims, and maybe get something about damages, have to assess how that might change the situation, maybe some information that presents a defense. So they're building as they're learning more information from the client files. And we also tried to make each exercise something where they were learning from seeing actual client documents. So police reports, interview transcripts, discovery requests, and expert reports, investigation reports, things like that.
And even sprinkling in a little bit of business development. There's somebody got called because they put their business card up at a laundromat, which they did after having that laundromat as a client. And trying to emulate, in some ways, actual scenarios once they're out in the workplace. And we did different ones. Sometimes they were an associate in a law firm. Sometimes they were solo practitioner. Sometimes an in-house counsel. Or sometimes just, I don't even think it was clear in every respect. But we tried to put them in settings settings they might actually find themselves, so that maybe there's a little bit of looking forward to getting out there in the world.
And have you had occasion to use the book yet with students? I know it wasn't published before, but have you used some of your examples and chapters in teaching your students as you were writing the book?
It's funny because I actually had a student who missed half of his first semester due to a medical issue and needed to do an independent study, for torts. And so I was like, well, I've got a great idea. And so he completed, at that time, we had, I think, 3 or 4 chapters drafted in intentional torts, which is right in line with the first year, maybe the beginning of negligence. And he worked through those for us. So not only did we get to use it, but we got his feedback too. So part of his assignment for me was not only to complete the exercises, but to give us feedback and to track how much time he spent. And then also in my midterm, and which covered intentional torts last semester, and then my final exam covering negligence and some of the subtopics within negligence, I definitely pulled from these, not for them to do exercises, but to have the fact scenario. And I think Meijken, after the midterm, I called her up. I was like, nobody thought of this. And we definitely thought it was a talking point that on one of the questions that students would address. And that kind of made, we were still in the editing process, and it made us go back and see if we could clear some questions up to make sure that topic was hit.
What a great way to have real-time feedback to the book when you were writing it. So as far as the book goes, if I teach torts, could I use Skills for NextGen Client Scenarios in Torts as my only text, or is this meant to be like a complementary book?
It's definitely meant to be a complementary book. We've got some of the cases, that typical, but it is not, well, I don't know if I'd say it's case law heavy or not, but I would definitely, as a 1L professor, I would want this as a complementary text, not as a sole text.
And we didn't tie it to any textbook, so it could be used in any torts classroom. We kind of took a torts textbook and went through the index to try and find the major topics that we wanted to cover, but it's not necessarily tailored to the material that you'd see in any one class. We also thought it could work as a standalone supplement for students to purchase as well, if they wanted that real life perspective about the principles that they're studying. If they wanted some extra practice, they could pick up this resource and do a lot of good practice with issue spotting, writing, client counseling, negotiation.
It sounds like a great way to reinforce topics, and I imagine it could be useful for first-year tort students, but also third-year students or graduates preparing for the bar.
Yes, the question styles aren't a perfect match for NextGen. For example, we don't have multiple choice questions, but we did try to take the specific task types from NextGen. So the foundational skills that are in the content scope outline that include issue spotting, counseling, research, drafting, and the specific tasks that are listed in that content scope outline, we tried to include a variety of those. So for example, in one chapter, which is IIED, we had an issue spotting exercise, and they got some more information, and we asked them to do a research exercise. Read this case, tell us the elements. And then we had them do another research kind of client investigation. What additional information do you need about damages to assess the claim? And then we had them do a drafting exercise where they proposed settlement terms for the client.
Could this book also be useful in an academic success setting to reinforce these skills?
Yeah, that's another audience that we anticipated, especially at schools where 1L students may be in a variety of different courses. This could be everyone's on a level playing field here. We're going to give you the law that you need. And so you can just practice the skills that you might need in a classroom as an attorney for NextGen. And so we thought it could be used in a single classroom. It's kind of a class in a box, or a lesson in a box that academic success professors could use.
And in the torts doctrinal classroom, a lot of us give quizzes throughout the semester. It's tricky because I don't, if I can figure out a way which I can, to work in self-assessment, it would be a very useful tool instead of a multiple choice quiz to kind of have them work through those issues. Because if you think about the doctrinal classroom, especially in the 1L year, everyone's raising their hands with a hypothetical. Well, what about this? What about that? And so what I do like about this book is we give it to them. You want a hypothetical? Here's some hypotheticals. And they're fun. They're fun to read. And that was some of the feedback we got from that one independent study student also, is that, wow, you never really think that going to a haunted house, could present so many tort issues. But wow, it really does, you know.
It sounds like this is the kind of book and the structure of the book that could be useful in any topic for NextGen. Certainly the skills that could be learned here would not only reinforce the torts topics, but also just the skills and the question type in a way that it almost doesn't matter that it's torts.
I think that's right. And one impetus for the project was also talking to doctrinal faculty about how they were preparing for NextGen. And a lot of them, they don't have the resources to develop exercises. We wanted to create some materials that they could use in a classroom. So we originally envisioned this as something that could be expanded to all of the NextGen subjects, including tort.
What sort of challenges did you encounter drafting a book that's based on an exam that has yet to be given?
We evolved, and then we had to kind of go back and revisit prior sections. So, you know, we started with intentional torts, and we weren't I don't think the spectrum of assignments or tasks was as wide as we later realized that this gave us the opportunity to cover. And that's when we really did dig into the NextGen and make sure we had covered everything and found other opportunities to sprinkle in some more NextGen type tasks. But that was definitely one of the challenges, just coming up with a system to make sure we were covering everything, to make sure the subjects were covered, who's doing what. We quickly realized how much work this was and didn't want to duplicate efforts. And at the same time, realized that I did not have a lot of creativity when it came to coming up with tasks, but I had great creativity when it came to writing a fact pattern. And Meijken was kind of the exact opposite. So that worked out great. Then we got a system going. We made a list of tasks we wanted to cover. So it was really just kind of getting on a roll, and creating efficiencies was probably the biggest challenge. We like each other enough. She lives in Denver and I'm in Dallas. So we were able to tie in a couple of working weekends. So that actually ended up being fun. I think we were ready to tear each other's throats out here and there, but we would always get to end the night with, you know, a walk to dinner and a drink, and that was nice.
Well, and two very nice places to visit, right? Dallas and Denver.
Yeah.
So that worked out. Is this one of the first books out there teaching the skills for NextGen based on a doctrinal subject?
I think in the specific context of NextGen, there's at least one other resource similar to this, although the structure of it is quite different. And I think they integrated more of the multiple choice question types than we did. But we were definitely inspired by other resources like this with client-based scenarios. Chris Franklin's book was a standout. And then there are other resources that we were envisioning that give students client-based scenarios to problem solve through. So those were definitely out in the market and were a model for us.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a leader in NextGen skills. I have not seen a lot of books that have started that yet. So bravo for being one of the first movers. You mentioned sharing this with doctrinal professors. Have you done so at UNT or elsewhere?
Well, we just did our faculty presentation and shared the concept with everyone. Our dean is, well, somebody was asking about it, maybe it wasn't the dean, about using it in the client negotiations and skills class. And legal writing. We thought we'd offer, I was going to offer them a copy or two, because for their legal writing projects, which with the 1L students, to try and tie it into what they're learning in their doctrinal classroom. So it kind of covers the gamut and can be useful to them.
Our academic success team intends to use it for the 1L skills course next year.
Great. Since NextGen is kind of happening now, it's being prepared and readied for its first administration. What resources did you rely on to ensure that the skills that you were emulating in the book were going to be those that were on NextGen?
I think our Bible was the content scope outline that lists the foundational skills and the tasks associated with each. There's enough detail there that even if we were drafting them to be a little more open-ended than what examinees might see on NextGen, the tasks still match and the type of things that they're doing should still match. So that was a really helpful resource. And then Shannon provided our own wealth of resources to ensure that our doctrine was aligned and correct.
And the content scope outline is an NCBE, National Conference of Bar Examiners document, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's on their website with their NextGen materials. It outlines the skills and doctrine that will be tested on NextGen.
Since you've immersed yourself in the content scope outline and the skills that they intend to test, and now that you've written a book to support that, I'm just curious about your opinion as to whether this will be a better bar exam in testing the minimal competence of our graduates before they can be a member of the bar.
Yeah, I think it's a better test. I think it's not maybe all of the reforms that we would have hoped for. It does still require an awful lot of memorized knowledge, although what examinees are expected to know is a little more realistic. We already talked about the rule against perpetuities going away, other sort of obscure doctrines that a general practitioner might not need. A lot of those things are students no longer have to have memorized as they come to the exam. So the cognitive load that might favor somebody who's just good at memorizing, that's been reduced, which probably will make a better, more fair experience for examinees. And I do appreciate how much more of the exam is assessing skills and advocacy as opposed to just memorized knowledge. It's expanding the impact of the performance tests, which I think have always been better at assessing readiness, assessing how well someone can hear a client's story, identify issues, start to problem solve. Those are good skills to assess for readiness. So I'm happy to see more of an emphasis on that in the NextGen exam.
And I also think that, as students are preparing for the exam, and they're still going to have to take multiple choice question practice tests and all. But I think that these, whether it's the exercises in our book or any other book, practice NextGen type questions, I think it has the ability to kind of build some confidence in them, because instead of it just being this esoteric thing they've got to memorize and they keep getting this one wrong, it actually gives them a way to kind of understand why it matters. And sometimes once you have that kind of down and you realize, like, gosh, I can be a lawyer. I covered everything they said my answer should cover. I just think that, makes you a better test taker if you actually feel like you can do this.
It's empowering, right? It gives them some confidence to go on.
Yeah.
So skills for NextGen, client scenarios in torts, obviously focuses on torts. I imagine there will be other books that follow that will focus on other topics, whether written by you all or someone else. If someone were to ask you your advice for writing this type of book in preparation for NextGen, what advice would you give them? What lessons have you learned in writing this together?
Definitely to map it out first. And if it was going to be the NextGen, then go to the NCBE site and look at the scope outline and just map it out from there. And I think if we had 5, I'm just thinking of our working days when we had so many sources spread around the table, just trying to realize that not everyone is learning this stuff the way that I taught it in my doctrinal torts classroom, and trying to make sure we're saying things not just the way the book I used or not just the way this bar outline or that, we're just really trying to make it all relatable and familiar to them. I mean, the law is the law, but just really trying to be careful with that to make it usable with every textbook in every classroom, every torts classroom, and every skills classroom.
I'd say find a good writing partner. That made the process infinitely easier. Like Shannon said, we were accountable to each other. We worked well together, and we both brought slightly different, maybe emphasis. Shannon obviously has bar readiness expertise, but was our doctrinal expert first and foremost, but is also wildly creative in coming up with the scenarios. And then I could try and get a student perspective and make sure that we were aligning our tasks. But when things started to go more quickly, it was because we sat down and decided which torts, what the kind of exercise might be. And then we tried to map out what kind of exercise we were going to include with each. We also tried to ensure that we were giving them maybe an opportunity to represent the plaintiff and then the defendant. Tried to give a lot of variety in each exercise, and it took some planning to do that. But once that planning was done, it went a lot more quickly.
And is this forthcoming or already out?
It's out.
Great. So again, congratulations on Skills for NextGen, Client Scenarios in Torts, published by Aspen. And before we conclude, I'd like to ask you both the question I always ask my guests, and that is, what are your predictions for legal education in the coming decade? And Meijken, why don't I start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think we're seeing it, and I think we were trying to address that with this book, which is giving more opportunities for client-based practice, seeing actual documents, having your hands in the materials, and trying to give students more practice-ready opportunities, even while they're studying doctrine. It's something we've seen a lot at our school, a lot that our doctrinal professors have emphasized. I think most of our professors try to do some kind of client drafting exercise in their classes, partially in response to NextGen, but I think NextGen was also informed by that change. So hopefully we'll continue to see more of that.
Shannon?
Yeah, I don't have any experience with this yet, but I think more exploration of the limitations and opportunities that AI brings as we probably embrace it rather than reject it. Just it'll be interesting and fun to see how we make that work. I always liken it to back in my day when, I think as I'm in law school or even as a young associate and partner saying, kind of balking at Lexis and Westlaw, like, oh, that's cheating. You should go upstairs to the library. So I'm paying very close attention, and I do not want to be that person. I want to see what opportunities it provides and how we can use it as a tool or how it needs to be limited. I can't speak intelligently about it, but I hope to learn.
Well, and in the interest of disclosure, we used it. We would feed our exercises to ChatGPT and see what responses it came up with to make sure that we were anticipating how the students might interpret the scenarios. So it was helpful for us.
Or the one time I called Meijken up and complimented her on the dad joke in one of the problems. I was like, I generally was writing the fact scenarios, and I said, I like that dad joke you threw in there. And she said, oh, well, I had some help from AI, so that was fun.
It is exciting what the prospects are for utilizing AI in some of these creative projects. Well, congratulations again, and thank you, Meijken and Shannon, for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this conversation with thought leaders in the Academy, we have additional episodes with others who may give you insight into what's going on in legal education. You can find those on your favorite podcast channel or on the Aspen Leading Edge webpage. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.